Hi, welcome back to the What Do You Love Most About Basketball podcast series. I'm your host, Samson Folk, and today I am in conversation with James Boo, whose claim to fame is probably trying to find outlier superstar talents in lesser known players. Today we're discussing aesthetics and the availability of basketball content, particularly the high value version of it, because James was somebody who came to basketball late in his life and has been endlessly fascinated with how he can learn about the game online. And of course, aesthetic is the I don't know. It seems like it is physical communication of art, or it is just art in itself. And so we discuss the different forms of it, what it means when it's tied to value and competition and winning and all that kind of stuff. So I sincerely hope you enjoy the podcast. Yeah, enjoy. James Boo, what is your favorite thing about basketball?
So I've been a sports guy like all my life. So it took me a bit of time to kind of think about what separated basketball from my other, sport loves, I guess, tennis, soccer, Australian rules football, like all that stuff. And I think where I started is probably, yeah, it's probably the aesthetic component of it. Like just like a posted dunk, someone ratioing someone at the rim just never gets old, like I mean also like the first player I really fell in love with was Kemba Walker. I don't know if he wasn't on the team I watched when I got into basketball, maybe I wouldn't have become so interested in it because like just the dribbling and stuff. But yeah, and then like I think just in basketball, like the fact that you have something like the jump shot, which every player pretty much does, but jump shot itself is such an like aesthetic thing. So just something about basketball like really gave me the urge to like try and learn how to play basketball myself. Like when I got into basketball, I didn't play basketball at all really. And then as soon as I watched 10 Kemba Walker games, I just wanted to go to the local park and try shooting. Some I must have tried to shoot that the Kemba Walker step back over. I forgot what his name is, McGee or something in MSG
UConn?
March Madness. Yeah,
Yeah.
UConn. The cross left and then just step back. Yeah, I must have tried to shoot that like 3,000 times in just the year 2017. So yeah, it's just something about it. Like don't really know how to explain. So aside from that, also I think so that's kind of what sparked my initial interest in basketball. But then I think what really helped it develop was the fact that I'm a person who kind of needs to understand something fully, I guess. Yeah, I just need to understand as much of something as I can. Need to be able to in my own head just completely break it down. I think in basketball, like there was a lot of really good, tactical content that was really well presented. Like I find basketball analysis is more film heavy than analysis of really any sport I've ever watched. And I think part of that is because I mean the TV angles, they show all 10 players on the court usually, unless it's transition. So I find that makes it a lot easier because I've tried like after I started, getting to basketball and doing a bit of analysis myself, like I tried doing it for soccer and Australian rules football. It's just completely different, like the camera angles. So I think that's probably part of it. But yeah, I just found like, I think of like thinking basketball, just it was just so well presented. Ben Taylor has a beautiful voice as well, which helps. And yeah, and then, people like you, Samson, and then, Jack and Frank, Mark Schindler, all those guys. I mean, I'm not saying these are the guys that I came up reading because I got into it before you three all, and others started really taking off. But people like you, who just, put out really quality work, do a pretty good volume, and then, really well explained. And you can just tell like how much hard work goes into each of those pieces. Like, yeah, that's all part of it too. Like, yeah, reading that kind of high quality analysis, it's just perfect for a guy like me who needs to try and understand something fully.
So it seems like Kemba Walker was able to
Yeah,
pique your interest and you're thankful
yeah,
to be involved in that. And then certain writers, certain analysts, the way they presented basketball made it so that you could follow that interest to
yeah.
whatever
I
else
think
you
so. I
wanted.
think I think like thinking basketball is the first one that like I thought was just really amazing. But then I think talking about like the overall basketball sphere, like recently I've felt it just keeps getting better. But I think it's always been pretty strong, like the analysis as a community.
I want to take it back to the aesthetics and basically the most interesting thing, well, coming into this conversation, aesthetic kind of dominates basketball,
Yeah.
and it dominates every sport it's part of. And you mentioned how a dunk is completely unique to basketball, as is the jump shot. Did you know that basketball used to be played in a cage, and the first recorded dunk was from a guy who climbed up the side of the cage and jumped
Oh,
towards the basket?
is that real?
That's real.
Holy shit! What the fuck? Yeah, I got. Oh my god! Sorry about the profanity. Yeah, you can good luck getting that out. But what the heck? I yeah okay. No, nothing. I had no idea about how the game of basketball was like developed. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
So for the listener, if you want to look into, one specific part of the aesthetic of basketball, which is dunking, the Off Court podcast actually did a tremendous episode on the dunk and why it was outlawed and how it came back into vogue and everything like that. So that'll be linked as well. But the jump shot, Kemba Walker, all these different manifestations of basketball and what it looks like. I'm very interested to ask you about emerging aesthetics in the NBA. So Manu Ginobili introduced an aesthetic, I think would be fair to say, whether it was him really popularizing the step back or the Euro step, whatever. But James Harden, and has paid tribute to Manu Ginobili, he took the aesthetic to the next level. And that is where we see it today. There's also the MJ, Kobe, DeMar post fade pipeline, all that kind of stuff. Is there an aesthetic that you're waiting to see emerge?
That is, yeah. I don't think haven't given that idea, I guess, any thought before. I think, like, I mean, obviously, you see more and more, traditional guys who are, quote unquote bigs starting to handle the ball a bit more. Like my guy Nas Reed is, or he, like, if you look at his like handling bag, like he's pulling out like behind the back dribbles, and then that's a pretty like deeply discussed idea, I guess, just the evolution of the game. But yeah, so there's obviously that. I don't know if this would count. I mean, it's just I don't think I haven't watched a whole lot of historical basketball, but I feel like kind of like Doncic and I mean Harden as well, really, but like Doncic and Jordan Poole. Like I feel like one of the main things I've heard about, one of the like key buzzwords in basketball recently has been like deceleration and change of direction, and I mean I guess that's always been part of it really though, but like I feel like yeah, maybe that's like I find Jordan Poole, especially the way he like dribbles, changes directions. I feel it's like I feel like that's the first time I've seen it my years watching the NBA. Like obviously borrows elements from other people, but like he's like going from he's like walking his dog or something to like suddenly getting super low. So I think like yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. I don't think I really have a super clear idea about that question though.
Yeah, that makes sense. The next thing I would ask about aesthetic is how it's intrinsically tied to success, but also not, because the aim in sport is to compete rather than, the production of, let's say, aesthetic value. And that,
Yeah.
that intersects also with the fact that it's an entertainment product. And so it's very interesting to think of aesthetic in the way of basketball because we've found players who mimic aesthetic to success, but also there are many players who have brought on their own aesthetic to success. And it's
Mm.
tough to say which falls in which group more often. And I'm curious what you think of that is if you could start out with like a perfect basketball body, would you mimic aesthetic or would you try and create your own?
Oh, jeez. I mean, I definitely say mimic. Like, I just, such a great question. Like when I first got into basketball, like one of the things I really wanted to do was mimic how, because I played a bit of soccer before then, and then like soccer was probably my favorite sport for the few years before I got into basketball, and then like I was never really good at it, but like my favorite part about it was yeah, one of my favorite things was seeing like especially like a left winger, their ability to like kind of fake one direction and go the other. Like it was like such. I still find today like in comparison to like the basic crossover like in the NBA, which is still so effective. Like I feel like soccer, like the like you need to be a lot more. You can't like win simple like that. Like so, I feel like the the base level of bag, I guess, for an offensive player in soccer is, I feel like it's deeper than in basketball, or at least like the base moves are more complicated. And I remember like, yeah, like I always wanted to like, what's it called? Like, I think it's like called the flip flap or something, or elastico or something. One of the soccer moves where it's on the outside of their foot. And they kind of, the ball's in the outside of the foot, and they kind of, yeah, just like fake one way and then quickly shift their foot. So they push the ball out. Like let's say it's on the ball's on the outside of your right foot, you push the ball out right, then you like instantaneously, swipe your foot underneath the ball, and then bring it back left using the inside of your foot rather than the outside. Like that kind of change of direction. I thought, yeah, like that's something I always wanted to really do in basketball. And then, but like obviously that's been done, like after all these years of watching basketball, I realized, like John Wall, that classic, almost like fake post up, like one dribble and then super hard cross, like that sort of stuff. You got the sham guard, which is kind of a really similar concept. Yeah, I'd be curious to know if there's any basketball players, in the modern day who kind of, brought their own aesthetic. Because I feel like, yeah, I don't know, I'm not gonna answer that. Like, because I'm not like, yeah, I'm not a great athlete, so I don't know why I'm talking about my own experiences so much. But I think in general, like a lot of these new NBA players, they actually do end up bringing their own aesthetic to it, which is, yeah, really impressive. And it's just not something I thought about deeply before, but like it actually is, now that I think about it, like such an impressive thing. But like for me, I think I'd just be like mimicking, or at least you like you mimic a wide range of skills. You figure out what you're good at, and then you start maybe like adding a few wrinkles to what you think you're good at.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the interesting thing, right, and is that maybe these aren't things that they work on in discrete scenarios. That perhaps because basketball is an invasion sport, that aesthetic comes about because of the way they're defended, and that
Yeah,
somebody you grew up playing against could be just as responsible for creating a foundational
right,
aesthetic for
right.
the NBA as the person
That's
who's
a great
actually
point.
doing it because of how they dictated you play against them. For example, like Nikola Jokic not looking at the basket but throwing in layups is very obviously because he had to be an incredibly creative finisher against larger men since he
Yeah,
was a young
yeah.
boy and stuff like that. So
Such
yeah,
a
I
good
think that's
point.
interesting.
Oh, that's a great point. Like this is, yeah, Petey Webb in his Lamelo, his Lamelo deep dive, I guess, before that draft. That's something he brought up. I think it was that piece. It might have been that piece, or it might have been, his episode bouncing around with you and Evan. Yeah, actually, memory's a bit muddled. But yeah, like he brought up how he was always playing against people, way up above his level, and he just had to find all these. Like I think that he said something along the lines of like he just got, he's like, yeah, it's like this idea of you throw a guy who's kind of underdeveloped into, a group of guys who are just much bigger and more athletic than him, and then he's just like, figure it out. And he mentioned how Lamelo found some really interesting answers. So yeah, you got him. I feel like you can, like, I feel like I remember this quote Jalen Noel had after a Minnesota game. It was like, when he used to play in Seattle, like you can't call fouls as the offensive player that easily, I guess. So, and I feel like thinking about it, like you think about no Kevin Porter Jr., Jamal Crawford, like, yeah, I feel like I don't know, maybe don't look for contact as much when they're playing because they know maybe that's inviting contact from the defenders and that's not going to get called. Like they all have ways to create their own space without relying on, a call from the umpire, the referee. I don't know, something like that.
Hmm. I think yeah, that makes me think about like quite a few different things. About obviously, it's all born from like the famous quote, "Necessity is the mother of invention," but the fact that different people colliding at different points in their lives are creating all these different outcomes. And this kind of brings me to the next thing: is that you play your friend, let's say, and you don't think about it this way. You would say out loud, "My friend knows how I play." But
Yep.
realistically, they're actually familiar with your aesthetic and can more easily recognize when you're about to do something. And players who have unorthodox aesthetics, you brought up Jordan Poole and the ability to go from walking the dog to being like completely perpendicular to the court almost and bursting into
Yep.
space. Uh, what advantages do you think come with being irregular in the NBA with how you look?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I feel like this is a tough question because I'm just like I'm kind of at a blank thinking of like what like which players I would consider genuinely like irregular, I guess. Like going back to Jordan Poole, like I kind of disagree with a lot of the analysis on him, I guess, because like people say he has an amazing first step. Like I think his first step is probably overall like it's probably above the 50th percentile, I guess, if that's the right way of saying it. And then yeah, I guess that's what I'd say. But like I think irregularity is probably a big part for now, I guess, especially of how he's so successful, getting to the rim and stuff. But then even then, like teams have started figuring it out. Like it's actually crazy how like adaptable these NBA players are. It was like even when there is a new irregularity, they kind of figure it out pretty quickly. So I think any advantage you get is probably just doesn't last very long because it's the NBA. Like you tweeted about this probably middle of last year, I guess. But you know, the 6'7", 6'8" ball handler making a skip pass like that legitimately broke the NBA for a little bit. But then teams, they've started to get really good at defending that. Like you definitely get benefit, but I just think these NBA teams, these players, they're so smart. They watch so much film. They end up picking it up pretty quickly. Like, first matchup of the season, if you in like maybe two or three matchups, like maybe a good defender will have figured out, or a good team will have schemed out, one of that methods of irregularity that leads to success. And that's kind of crazy because that's not really that much time. Like, you think about, me playing with mates at the playground, like how many times I would have had to, or how many times they would have had to cross me over before I figured out, what their crossover, I guess, looks like. Like, so yeah, I think my summary is these NBA people are like not only genetic freaks, but like also, well, they're just freaks in general. Like they've got freaks in every aspect.
This kind of makes me think about like playing defense on somebody, right? And how we talked about how a defender, if they're overwhelming, could force you into someplace new. But an offensive player, a lot of times, if they're facing a good defender, they're forcing the defender to kind of mirror their actions. Like the best
Yeah.
one-on-one defender you could possibly think about is a mirror for what the offensive player is doing. And I think that speaks to the point you're making about how these guys are incredibly malleable, incredibly talented, and that just makes for, these incredible athletes who can do incredible things, and they have the feel for the sport to start implementing that at a rapid pace. And I think that is what aesthetic is. That's what it's all about, is that there are people on a court. You wouldn't have to know their names, but you can recognize what's happening there. But it does make me think about aesthetic dominates the iconography around basketball. And something I've taken, like a fun little term I use, is aesthetic merchant, for somebody who can only identify players as being good if they see that player playing in a similar way to players that were understood as good before. That's why in
Okay.
that I've spoken about this many times, but why Pascal Siakam fundamentally was
Mm,
understood, or misunderstood, I should say, as a player, because
yeah.
he didn't look like a lot of the wings. He doesn't look like an isolation engine, or, a player who could break down a defense as often as he does. And it also makes you think about OG Anunoby. And the Raptors have been drafting the underrated archetypes for a while, so it only makes sense that these two guys are brought up. But OG being thought of as a 3-and-D player, despite being the number one post hub for the Raptors this year, being a really high
Mm,
isolation usage player, and being a wing who is above average both in transporting himself to the rim with the ball and finishing there. Like he by the numbers, by the actuality of the game, is very much almost the opposite of 3-and-D. But because
mm.
people don't like slow down post hubs, because people don't like watching him drive because it's clunky, they just assume that it's bad. And I find that incredibly interesting. I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I mean, I've got to kind of expose myself here, but like, I think that like that kind of yeah, the aesthetic merchant like I don't. It's not that I think there's anything wrong with it because subliminally saying is like yeah, we're all kind of shaped by like what we experience. Nothing that's nothing like deep or anything, but like going back to the basketball question, like would you try and mimic aesthetic? Would you try and add your own? Like if I got no inspiration, you know, I'm not gonna just magically come up with anything, at least for me. But going back to the basketball thing, like yeah, shit, me with like LaMelo Ball, like before he came in, really, my idea of an offensive engine was be the defender, draw a defender, make the right read. Yeah, and then like only kind of recently, I've realized like LaMelo just like dribbling it up the court quickly, having his crazy vision, and just you know passing it before the defense is set. Like that's an advantage every time as well, actually. But it's just completely different to what I was used to watching previously. So I kind of undersold the impact of that. So I think you're on a winner there. You've absolutely hit it bang on the spot. Like that's really good take.
Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about, because aesthetic dominates basketball, and I think it would take a research paper to try and tease apart, especially with being like an entertainment, especially being entertainment as we talked about earlier, to try and parse out how valuable it is to mimic, what that has actualized for players today, and what that means for your own iconography in the sport, your own fan base that you create and kind of cultivate and all that kind of stuff. But that's like a way longer conversation and way more in-depth conversation than we'll have here. The content, the accessibility of high-level basketball content, analysis, whatever. I'm curious, do you think what is your version, what is your ideal version of the future of that landscape?
Oh man. Well, given I did just listen to your podcast with Lewis, which was amazing and going to be far better than this one's going to be. So everyone should check that out. Yeah, I think that's in my head right now. Like the stories, I guess. Like my first piece I wrote in basketball was just me, like basically just a shit ton of film and just like breaking it down. I guess a decent amount of that now. A decent amount of people can do that pretty well. Gee, the next step though, yeah, like there's even like pretty good number of like YouTube content creators now, which is crazy and it's amazing for new fans. Just in the time I've been a basketball fan, like an already accessible sport has become just exponentially more accessible, I think. But I think it is a really great landscape right now, honestly. Like something something else I really like about basketball is just like how like, there's now this like intersection of like all these different, I guess, heuristics, I guess. Like, you got ball don't stop. He's really taken off, at least in my circles, like the last year or so. I think that's been great because it's very entertaining and very funny to see how people react to him. You got, just like the quote unquote sat sexuals, the people who yeah, just I guess think about it in a mathematical way. So I know some people who are like, designing their own metrics and stuff, which is crazy, good for them. Like that's a whole lot of effort and good thinking.
This, if I could cut you off, actually,
Yeah.
this brings up like a fascinating question from me. So you brought up the term stat sexuals, people who basically are not spending as much time as you'd like watching film or like the game, probably, and are, I would say, more comfortable making sweeping declarations about players than they should be. And that hubris comes from looking at tracking data, advanced analytics, and all that kind of stuff. All of that stuff, all of the stuff that I still love. I just watch a lot of film too.
Yeah.
And a curious thing for me is like in baseball, if a third baseman wants to have a better WAR, and defensive WAR is like wins added basically, and
Mm.
it's similar to basketball in that way. But if he wants to have a better defensive WAR, he can actually take a defensive position that is worse than his that is worse for his team, but better for his own individual statistics. He can play closer to the third baseline, and his team will
Oh wow.
probably be worse off for it. But his own defensive WAR will improve, meaning that he'll be worth more on the open market and all that kind of stuff. I'm curious if you think that
Jeez.
I'm curious if you think tracking data or players might kind of learn or catch on to this ability to kind of game tracking data to become more valuable in the eye of whoever is evaluating. And obviously, like, WAR is something that is in the negotiation room for baseball free agents, for re-signees and all that kind of stuff. And like, they arbitrate based on that sometimes. So
Yeah.
baseball is obviously at a different place than basketball, and basketball
Hmm.
has like a coach who can take you out and do that kind of stuff. But baseball is a little bit more limited in that regard. But I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I just think it depends on really like how popular, how popular that sort of like tracking data you mentioned, gets, you know, does that is that already part of the free agent negotiations and stuff. But like a lot of people have seen, like Luke Kennard's contract, if they have a defensive rating of whatever it is below that when he's on the court, he gets, an extension. Like I think Mo Harkless, he notoriously didn't shoot a three in his
Mm-hmm.
last however so many games in the I think it was 16-17 season because he had that incentive. Like you see incentives that are based on, I guess, stats in contracts a decent amount these days. It's just they're kind of still like in, I would say they're kind of in a like, still kind of the more basic stats being used in contract negotiations. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see like, yeah, that's the thing. Like tracking data, being fused with metrics. I guess like I feel like that's very much its infancy still. So I think it will happen. Yeah,
Okay, so
because we've seen players try to game the current system already. So yeah,
you and I have talked about before, like, how skip passes can sometimes be fetishized, how different aesthetics are attached to different archetypes of players. And are those players more appreciated just on Twitter or in certain groups? Does that actually affect what contracts they might sign? I'm curious what you think analytics has done to the aesthetics of basketball.
honestly, like I don't think I've watched enough basketball, like because I like the main basketball I've watched is just the NBA from 2016 onwards, and I feel like that's like I've only really lived the analytic era, I guess, and like yeah, like I've only yeah, I really don't think I can. I mean, like something like a player having an open shot, 15, and then like taking a couple dribbles to get behind the 3 point line, like that's I think that's like I'm sorry to people who like you know get because people who work in analytics like full time they get this shit all the time. They get all this like analytics slander like, oh, a mid range shot is not analytics and stuff. It's like, I don't want to like add to that, but I feel like yeah, like players who used to yeah, probably just catch and fire then like they get 15 feet whatever it's in like transition probably like and they just go take a couple drills and get behind 3 point like that. Like that's definitely analytics advanced. I feel like yeah, like probably yeah, like off cuts as well too, like in basketball as well. Like I feel like you probably see a lot more passing out of like cuts than you probably would beforehand. And so yeah, I think that's kind of like that whole like shot selection thing. That's probably one of the main ones, I guess.
If I could interject, I think
Yeah,
the main thing for me is that analytics has like a very loose impact on superstars, but an
yeah,
overwhelming impact on role players, for example.
yeah,
And that could you could see the what would Dorian Finney-Smith be if he played in 2006 relative
Right.
to what he's playing like today? And that's one of the easier points to make is because the Dallas Mavericks were one of the teams who on their practice court had spacing boxes, like spots on the court that they mapped out were the most efficient, maximized spot for a guy to be standing
Mm.
on the court to create spacing for the spread pick and roll for Luka Doncic or something to that effect, right? And I think more than anything, role players are what's changed immensely. Stars will always be stars. But you look at a role player in 2011 and then a role player today, it is vastly different what you're getting and what's being asked of them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't really have much else to add. Again, I just don't think I've watched enough like historical basketball and like yeah, like theoretically the effect of I guess like the role players being more I guess aware of their shot selection and what shots they're allowed to take, like that I feel like that should have an effect on, like their rhythm, their confidence, that sort of thing to make plays in big situations. But I feel like that whole thing, like I don't know, like again, I just haven't watched enough historical basketball and like watching like interviews of past players, like they still talk about stuff like you need to get this guy an early shot, so and you need to keep him engaged, so he's going to be there, at the end when you get double team, that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't have much else to add on that one. Sorry.
No, that's good. That's we're basically just looking to tease some insights where we can and where there aren't. I mean, you just keep it moving.
Okay.
There isn't always a good answer to a question. Some questions are really hard. As long as it's what you think about basketball, then there'll be good stuff. Before we get out of here, is there any parting shots you want to give to aesthetics or the coverage of basketball or anything like that?
Not really, to be honest. I actually just really love like the way the game is growing, the way the landscape is developing. Like I think the overall direction is yeah. I think on court, I think basketball like is both in a good spot and then like in a place to develop well because yeah, I just again like I think you're seeing more and more voices, and I think yeah, that can only be a good thing. More perspective. So that's what I would probably say. So yeah, nothing else apart from that.
That's as good a place to sign off as any. More voices, more
Yeah, a bit
thoughts.
optimistic. That's surprising for me, but yeah.
Well, optimism is good, even if it is surprising, James. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, no worries, Samson. Thanks for thanks for inviting me on. I still feel hopefully I kept my imposter syndrome pretty hidden throughout that because instead of 40 obviously, but shit, you got some great people on this.
Well, if you didn't, I'll hide it in post, if anything.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Listener, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it immensely. There are more of these to come. Thanks for tuning in, whether you got into this in the morning or at night. Have a blessed day and goodbye.